across. I waved, but you were focused on something else.
All right, just not having a technological 101 on this end. So.
Oh, good to see everybody. Hey, Sean.
Kia ora.
Hello, Mel. I don't think I've met you, but I am saying hello.
Hello, great to meet you. I'm just in Grant's team.
Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Councillor Wilson, Mel is our team leader consents, join us from our Melbourne office. So,
Wonderful.
So this is an international toll call. We better hurry.
yeah, so Mel's been with us for goodness gracious a number of months, but with our closed borders, she's in Melbourne and we're here. Hey, Mel.
Yes, that's right.
It just goes to show how we can work from anywhere in the world, right? Nowadays. I think it's great. I guess it's a little warmer in Melbourne, Mel?
No, actually, it was actually quite chilly.
Okay. And are you still hearing ambulances all the time, or have the numbers decreased?
Well, it decreased slightly, but yeah, I'm still staying at home, so I'm in my little ivory tower and just not getting out.
Sounds safe. Sounds sensible.
So for those that are in the chamber, is everyone there? Are we ready to kick off, or are we waiting for?
No, Rob's
some people to
Rob's is coming in. One more coming in, and we're sorted.
On the basis that Rob has just arrived, we can pretend we were waiting for him, and we're now ready to go.
I was just on another meeting with Mia, and she was sort of between meetings. So I'm not sure if is she in the chamber with you?
No, she's not.
Mayor Paula will be here around 11, I understand.
Okay. All right. Shall we just shall we kick off into the first item then? If everyone's happy with that.
Yep.
Just to be clear, Paula will join you online in just a second, but okay. crack on, and she'll join when she can.
Marvellous. And I think Carmen, are you able to share the screen for the presentation?
I believe Justine is going to do that.
I can share from this end, Sean, so
okay.
I'll get that up. There we go. How's that?
Beautiful. So thanks everyone. So the first item is the Reform Response Program, and we've spoken about this a few times, but just I guess to reiterate that the Reform Response Program is about Council's response to primarily the three big government reform programs impacting local government. So the resource management reform, the future of local government, and the three waters reform. And so the main focus of today is on resource management. Just noting that there's a discussion on three waters at council meeting tomorrow. So I think that might have been in some of the pre-circulated material, but an update on that. But I think we're just going to park that discussion for tomorrow, essentially. So if we just sort of flick on a couple, Blair. So I'm not going to do much speaking today. I'm just really introducing it. And I guess one of the things we do want to do is just keep reiterating that although we're sort of deep dive into particular aspects of each of these reform programs, we do just want to keep in mind that we are looking at these things holistically, and we do have a regular staff steering group or reference group representing all the different reform streams, and it's about influencing central government in terms of what those reforms look like, and it's also about looking back into the organisation and preparing our organisation for those things. So I won't labour that, the timelines are in the presentation in terms of where some of the, I guess, the major milestones are coming up. For waters, as I said, there's a conversation at council tomorrow. For the future for local government, we do have a workshop coming up on the 23rd of February, I think it is. And then, as I said, the majority of the conversation today, we want to focus on resource management. And there is so there's a discussion document and there's a submission which council, which we want to make on behalf of council. And so that's really what we are sort of digging into today. So Hannah is going to introduce the item and do the sort of the umbrella piece around resource management reform, and Mark Davey will work through some of the specifics. So that said, I think I am going to hand over to Hannah. Hannah, are you there?
Good morning, councillors. We've been on mute. So this is really picking up from December.
Hannah, are you there?
Can you hear me now, Sean?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. This is picking up from December, where we foreshadowed the Ministry for Environment discussion document on the resource management reforms. Just to recap, as we're, first session for the year, the reform itself is seeking to repeal the Resource Management Act in its current form and replace it with 3 new pieces of legislation. So that's the Natural and Built Environments Act, Strategic Planning Act, and the Climate Adaptation Act. Each of those have been socialised with council at a high level to date. We have made submission on the Natural and Built Environments exposure draft, which gave us some kind of indication of what's going to be in the final legislation. Since then, local government and central government have had numerous discussions about the engagement that local government would like to have as these pieces of legislation progress. So as a result of that, the Ministry for Environment has put out a discussion document. And as part of that, it really outlines a bit more of the detail around what's going to be in the SPA and the MBA, and gives us an opportunity to provide feedback on that by asking about 33 questions. Sorry, I'm just checking to see why the slides, there we go. So the feedback that we provide on this document is going to inform ministerial decisions on the final legislation. And it's really an opportunity for us to highlight what we think the current system should look like, how it should operate. And it goes as wide as things like the funding environment, the role for local governments and elected members, and pretty much the form and function of local government as we know it. So it is much more wide-ranging than first impressions might look like. So the questions that it's posing cover a number of different areas. Today, Mark's going to take you through many of these in a little bit more detail. But as we've been progressing the submission as staff, we recommend keeping it at quite a strategic level in terms of some of these rather than diving right down into the detail. So I'll leave it to Mark to take you through those. But some of the key themes, just as a reminder that we've provided to date on previous submissions, is the need for metro and urban planning to remain separate or have some sort of carve out from wider regional planning. That's given our unique kind of growth experience as opposed to the rural land around us, which has very different issues. We've been concerned about, the workability and implementation of these regional level plans that are being proposed, and how they'll actually be developed and use the expertise that's already on the ground. We're looking at representation and the function of joint committees. So that's the decision-making processes and the role of elected members into the future. A really fundamental aspect that's also coming through is maintaining local voice and placemaking if we're taking planning to a more regionalised approach. Then funding the outputs of these plans. Does our current funding system actually function in a way that's going to effectively implement these documents? If we've got central government around the table and local government, how should they best be given effect to? And the last point that
Hey, Hannah, we've lost you there. Can I slide into that silence with a question, please?
on first impressions, it seems that they potentially don't. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, we lost you there, so I noticed the silence, so I've leapt in with a question. I'm just after your definition of placemaking, because I'm seeing that pop into that and into the Three Waters discussion. It's a very subjective term. Could you just be really clear with us as to what your definition of placemaking actually is?
Sure. More of a concept I think we're using it there as, people have their own kind of visions for their local communities. Communities have their own identities, and it's making sure that those are actually communicated up to a regional level. So not a hard and fast definition, but definitely a concept of local representation.
Yeah, I'll touch on this in one of the later slides. It's really about that localism component. So how do we avoid a sort of homogenous planning approach when there are some really unique local identity characteristics which need to come through?
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'll be really keen on the difference between local voice and placemaking in that one, because it is a term that is getting thrown around a lot. I'm just really keen to be up to speed with it. So I'll look forward to that slide. Thank you.
I think Councillor Mark and probably just for all the members, before we get into the specific themes that we wish to dive on, this is probably just a good chance to ask any genuine questions.
Great.
One of the points that you made, Mark, which is really important, is there's a lot of parallels between the Three Waters themes and the RMA themes that you've seen on this page here. In particular, the future for us as a metro city and our needs and what our future community looks like is going to be very different from those in a more rural or district context in the bigger areas around us. And so much as we're sort of debating with Three Waters, how do we have a strong voice that represents a metro community? The same issues are very much relevant here. This is about thinking about planning for future use and land use and future shape of our communities. It needs to be really cognizant of a metro context as opposed to a one-size-fits-all kind of regional approach.
Got it.
So if that helps make sense,
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of...
Thank you, it does. Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that, Blair.
It's probably a really good time for Mark to take over and just dive into some more of the detail.
Unless there's any other comments or questions at this time.
Yeah, so the sort of thinking behind this was I was quite keen, Councillor Wilson, to have quite an interactive session. So I'm happy to sort of speak to these slides for a couple of minutes just in terms of what's on the slide, but then really about hearing from councillors as to what your view is. So I don't know if that's an okay approach, Councillor Wilson.
Yes, that would be fine.
Cool. So just before we sort of dive into it, I just guess I'd reinforce the significant departure that the RM reform program is proposing to what we currently have. It is both quite fundamental in terms of the planning context, but also local government context in terms of moving a lot of the traditional roles and functions of local authorities into these joint committees. And also elevating the role of local planning to sort of a regional level as well. Notwithstanding that, and just pick up on the slide in front of us, there's a lot of similarities between what is coming through in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of the planning mechanisms which are being proposed, similar to that which we have under the RMA. So I suppose sort of my view is somewhat sceptical in this space, because the national planning framework that's being proposed is in effect what we have by way of the National Environmental Standards and National Policy Statements. Now, these tools for the first sort of 20 or so years of the RMA were seldom used, but we're seeing a lot more, I guess, central guidance, if you'd call it that, coming from central government. So, we've seen the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which is starting to really sort of crank the screws in terms of what the expectations are centrally, nationally, at a local level, and other things in terms of freshwater, NES and things like that. So might stop there, and we can work around the room a little bit.
Paula, you've got your hand up for a question?
I do, thank you. I'm really interested in the national policy statements and NES and how they're translated into the regional plan. My concern or my question is around how well you think the monitoring of the compliance with those policy statement standards and even the regional plan has been, because actually I was one of the commissioners for the development of the regional plan at the Regional Council, which you have to give, as which Hamilton City Council and all others have respect to. The question is, are we in the place where, how do we know we are? Because I suspect we're not giving effect to and everyone around the country is not giving effect to the standards, not giving effect to the statements or their regional plans. They know what's required for them, but they're constrained by things like investment and other matters. So, I mean, for example, there'll be very few places in the country that are giving effect to any biodiversity requirements in the regional plan. And of course, they've been predicting for years that there might be a national policy statement on biodiversity. Still waiting, however. So just in terms of that, it's all very well having the standards and statements and plans that tell you what you're supposed to achieve. The difficulty is in making sure you actually make progress and comply with those. Just to comment on that, if I may.
I think monitoring's always been the missing link in a lot of the RMA plans, whether it's at a regional level or more at a local level. But I guess my point there is that planning is a pretty complex space, and you are constantly dealing with trade-offs between investment, between the environment, between growth and development. And I think, you know, for all its faults, that's why the RMA is sort of difficult to work with, because of these competing interests which it's trying to manage.
So would a standardised reporting, because they've been talking about this for a very long time as well, never happened, would a standard reporting mechanism in any way be useful in the next, whatever the next iteration of the RMA is? How are they going to improve on that reporting and enforcement arm of it? Or what would we say as a council about that to encourage that side of things to be improved? What would be our feedback there?
Well, I think the thing is that the monitoring costs money, and I think you know I think that really is the nub of the issue. So if it's funded and if there's some standardised monitoring criteria, it's quite easy, isn't it? That would be missing both leads to that at the moment.
So I would like in the feed, through you, Mr. Chair, in the feedback that we offer in this direction, to make some useful commentary about improving compliance and regulation and the costs therefore, because you're right, it costs to monitor anything, but I think that's something we shouldn't be silent on anyway. Probably need to do a bit more thinking myself as well. Thanks.
I think Paula just tied in with that, the move to greater regionalisation or regional committees and potentially fewer plans may make the deployment of what you've just raised there easier in a more practical sense, because you're not talking about every council having a plan, you're talking about potentially one plan per region, although there may be some sub-plans. So practically that may be easier to deploy. The art is going to be in actually conducting that monitoring and I guess some of the conflicts that Mark talked about between the various policy statements and environmental standards that are potentially driving us to absolutes, but they actually taken together also lead to conflicts in terms of how the ability to deliver the outcomes are playing out.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at a tool such as LAWA, for example, right, which was devised for that very purpose, it's been very patchwork in its success.
I think
The
I think the key point that Mark has made and Hannah's made is that these national standards, national policy statements have been seldom used in the past, are now becoming a fundamental fabric of the future. Local nuanced local flavour could be usurped by these national directions and guidance, which I think Councillor Mark goes back to a question around what is placemaking. Placemaking is about potentially trying to capture the local flavour, local essence, and wind it into your rules, as opposed to kind of broad national edicts that just come across everything. And we've seen those in a very practical sense play out in the last couple of years with some of the ones that Mark cited. And you could even say, for example, the law change, which was a law change, the MDRS just pre-Christmas is another example of sort of a one-size-fits-all approach.
Well, that's what national environment standards and policy statements are. So I just want to know whether, from the technical point of view, staff are saying we should promote and give effect to those standards and statements, or whether we're saying they're no longer the tool.
Well, I guess just coming back to the slide, Mayor Paula, I mean, the National Planning Framework is effectively going to be the new form of national environmental standards. So I think that's good. I think setting some benchmarks nationally is important. But I think it's important that they're not too prescriptive in certain areas, that you still allow those local attributes or those local nuanced responses to come through.
Cool, thank you. It's not that straightforward, is it really? Yeah, I get it.
It's very, very complex.
And I think equally, Mayor Paula, our role in submitting on those as they are developed will be critically important. We have an example, is it the National Policy Statement on fresh water, where it's led to some quite interesting challenges in terms of residential development and wetlands and those sorts of things. So you know, we'll have to be very conscious of any of those statements and the views that we then take on those, because they will be very, very binding on any of these plans.
Well, we've already got that with the national standards on drinking water, which a lot of the country don't adhere to, which makes my point. They're there, but they're not being adhered to. So, it's in the how. The how do we use these tools, our resource to use these tools? Otherwise, it's just a plan.
Correct. Correct.
Do we have any other questions or comments on that slide before we move on?
Nothing in the chamber.
Cool. So regional spatial strategies. So interesting. I mean, I think there's been some good lessons learned here in terms of experiences from the Waikato and from the Bay of Plenty and from Auckland in terms of the need for regional spatial strategies in high growth areas. There's a little bit to work through. I mean, what's being proposed through the Randerson report in terms of how these function is very, very similar to our current future-proof strategy, albeit possibly not actually with the same weight as the future-proof strategy, because they're not talking about our regional spatial strategies being embedded into effectively regional policy statements. So they're going to be sitting outside of that traditional RMA regulatory framework to some point. And that then just throws up some further issues in terms of how your land use plans, or what we know as our district plans, then are implementing or giving effect to that higher order strategy. So at the moment, they're talking about not being inconsistent with your regional spatial strategy. Now, from the Auckland experience through the 90s in terms of the Auckland Regional Growth Strategy, that caused significant issues when you had 7 different local authorities and a regional sort of growth strategy for which those 7 local authorities weren't bought into or weren't giving effect to. Just before I pause, I guess the other, we'll get to this a little bit, but the other issue is in terms of the funding. in that the proposal at the moment is for the funding tools to be sitting alongside the regional spatial strategies. And I think in many cases, having the funding at that high strategic level is the wrong place for it. You can't be making detailed funding decisions off a high level strategy. So I'll just pause there and kind of hand back to the floor for comments.
Hey, Mark, it's Sean here. Is just in terms of the geography and sort of how well defined that is in terms of the regional spatial strategy. Obviously, when we're sort of referring to future-proof kind of areas, we're talking about sort of a sub-region. Have you got any kind of comment on how embedded in, I guess, legislation the definition of those regional areas are?
My understanding is they'll be following the current regional boundaries. So you're right. Future-proof is on a sub-regional basis, if you like, which seems to be at a spatial scale appropriate to the issues for which it's trying to resolve. So I think the other issue which you're picking up on is the scale at which this then starts to occur, and is there any value in that at that real sort of at the larger regional scale?
So I think, Councillor Sarah, you want to make a comment?
Thanks, Blair. I just had a question around the stuff in the italics, those comments there, where it talks about the future-proof strategy having more weight than is intended by the regional spatial strategies. And I guess, looking at the benefits of voluntary versus involuntary requirements, can you go into that a little bit more? Because I guess one of the frustrations I've had is the lack of teeth in some ways around doing planning and then having things overridden anyway.
So the value of having future-proof embedded in the regional policy statement means that the lower level district plans have to give effect to it. By having the regional spatial strategy sitting outside of that more sort of prescriptive or regulatory-based planning framework, which has your land use zoning and bits and pieces like that, weakens that legal relationship between those two plans. So it means that effectively, at the lower level, you've got more remit to do things because the legal test is weaker. It's not a give effect to in the RMA context. They're suggesting it should not be inconsistent with, and I guess that was the example from Auckland in that there was a whole issues that came out of that.
Right. Is there a reason that they're suggesting that rather than something more effective?
Well, I think it's to give that flexibility in terms of these plans being a little bit more nimble than your sort of hard regulatory plans like the policy statement or your district plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I think one of the important aspects here for Council to sort of think about is regional spatial strategies. And if you look at the Waikato, very big region, from Thames Coromandel through to Taupo in the south, you've probably got three very distinct sub-regions within the Waikato region. You've got the future-proof area, which is anchored by the Metro Hamilton area. You've got Eastern Waikato, and you've sort of got the Southern Waikato area. Different levels of economies, different environmental considerations, different levels of deprivation versus growth versus housing needs. And in a metro context in the Hamilton area, needs that are vastly different to other parts of the region. So to have one regional spatial strategy, I guess the question we have to think about is how would that work? Would that work and serve the interests of a metro Hamilton area? And when you look at things such as, Paul will understand this, Waikato Plan, Mayoral Forum, etc., where you become one voice of many in a regional context versus the need for a sub-regional lens to better represent the needs of our metro area. I think it's a really important lens and certainly position that staff have is that a sub-regional focus and particularly a metro focus within these regional spatial strategies is paramount. The risk of Hamilton's needs being diluted by a wider regional focus is high. And so we absolutely need to, in our view, fly the flag of a model that captures those interregional and sub-regional aspects, which are so fundamental in our context.
Thanks, Blair. Just supplementary to that, I guess is if we were wanting to have a stronger framework for, well, for us as this metro area, I guess some of the development that goes on our borders around Hamilton is kind of in conflict with what we're trying to achieve within the city, and you know, we're well aware of all those issues. So is there something that we can advocate for that would actually strengthen our ability as in that metro area to, I guess, kind of keep closer to what we're trying to achieve?
It really comes back to that current arrangement whereby you embed the future-proof strategy within the regional policy statement. That becomes your straitjacket to keep those other local authorities on the same page in terms of the strategic direction. But I suppose that the point here is that under the proposed framework, you're no longer going to have a whole lot of separate district plans. You're just going to have one plan covering the region, but then a regional spatial strategy which sits over top of it.
And Sarah, from a non-planner, from my perspective, really what I'm raising the flag for is to say that within the context of a single national built environment, you know, an NBA plan for the region and a single regional spatial strategy, there needs to be provision for a sub-regional perspective and particularly a metro perspective within that as well. So if you think about our sort of hierarchy of some of our plan instruments, we have Future Proof, which is sub-regional, and we have Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, which is really looking at Hamilton's needs. So we need to find a way for those types of long-term planning instruments to have a role within this new framework to ensure that the things that you've raised around outcomes on our periphery in that kind of boundaryless context are not lost in a single view of the whole region. Because I think that, I don't know if Mayor Paula is on the call or not, but certainly there is a high risk here that Hamilton's metro considerations and all the things that we grapple with in some detail will be softened or lost in translation, and you may get those unintended consequences. I think, Councillor Sarah, you're concerned about, and so are we. So.
Yeah, and it's the private plan changes as well that, you know, so it's not just decisions made by the councils, but those kind of imposed on them that are problematic. So, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Blair, is there an argument? Sorry, Blair, do you think there's an argument to be made, perhaps in terms of maybe it's future for local government and that sort of slightly broader lens, that to cut through some of the stuff is our view on regional council sort of formed on the basis of a sort of water catchment areas, and as sort of with the transformation or the reform of the water space, the basis on which that region was developed becomes less relevant. Like is part of our feedback on future for local government that the boundaries for regional councils need to be rethought and aligned to, you know, those kind of distinct regions within the greater Waikato sort of region, do you think? So that the what we think of as regional council is more of that greater metro area?
I certainly think there's some merit in exploring that, Sean. You know, to base a lot of these decisions on a water catchment area doesn't reflect the whole range of other considerations, which is really what you're asking. So
yeah, so I think within this legislation, the kind of the regional boundaries are what they are, but I think as we're sort of thinking about this reform program across the whole that whole suite of reforms, this is sort of an intersect point for waters reform, future for local government, and RMA, and potentially that's something that we think about in terms of council's position, which is maybe through the future for local government as opposed to, rather than sort of through this sort of feedback specifically, but when we're talking about the instruments and sort of that focus on the sub-region, I think aligning those sort of feedback points.
Well, look, I think through future local government, the concept of what is the future size of territorial authorities and potentially, what is a geographic area, sub-region, region, should there be fewer but bigger councils? I think that's part of the future local government debate, Sean, so you're absolutely right. Mayor Paula. I see you got your hand up.
Sorry, thank you. I was just following that debate with interest, and I thought the questions that Sarah raised were spot on and very useful. Going back to that, I do think the water and the regional boundaries are based around the natural resource management set in particular. So their interface with the environment is a lot smaller, wouldn't you agree? I mean, they do dams and flood schemes and things, but their interface with the built environment, except for through things like hazard mapping, is a lot less. And I think that could be a useful distinction when we look at local government reform. To what extent, I mean, because the metros shape a lot of urban form, the majority of it. Some small centres are growing, some are actually diminishing really fast. So we're always going to be the urban growth centres of New Zealand. And as such, I think that we could make some useful distinctions, not getting rid of the boundaryless approach, Blair, but I think the case for the metros in the next 10 years is really strong, really, really strong, 50% of the population being in Tauranga, Hamilton alone. But it also means, could we perhaps give them some feedback around offsetting effects? Like, for example, a city growing is going to have considerable effects on biodiversity. Not that it should diminish biodiversity, but there are opportunities to do things in different areas, mitigate, minimise, mitigate, all of those. And offset is another tool that has been, in my view, very poorly understood. If you're going to grow here, where would you put some green space? If you're going to do this, where would you take care of? It's been a bit patchy, so that's just my view anyway.
I think it's a very good point, Paula, and I think, as you say, there is a really important role here for regional spatial strategies to make some hard decisions that New Zealand needs to face up to in terms of looking at how we think about our future and potentially determining where development can occur, where retreat needs to occur, where offset mitigation is appropriate for environmental growth elsewhere. So absolutely, there's a great role for these regional spatial strategies. It's just that the voice of the metros cannot be lost in a one-size-fits-all regional approach. I think that's the key message here, and it sounds as though you are supporting that advocacy. That the risk for a Hamilton context is that if it's a one-size-fits-all regional approach, we may get some very unhelpful direction that leads to all sorts of outcomes in a city context that won't work, or will lead to poor outcomes, or poor livability, or poor well-being for our community. And so it's really to make sure that our perspective, our knowledge, our voice, and all the years of understanding we have in terms of our community is factored into how these regional spatial strategies are developed and continue to be updated going forward.
Yeah. And, sorry, just another comment. The regional plan gave strength to future-proof and other growth strategies, if you recall, in that chapter. And I think there's still a place for giving some weight to growth planning, especially in the metro setting, I guess. So I am agreeing with you around that entirely. Sense?
Just building on that, Mayor Paul, I think I guess the overarching thing here is that there are certain issues or certain challenges, certain planning things which are better dealt with at different spatial levels.
Yes.
So, environmental point of view, sure, at a regional water catchment level, that makes sense. From an urban growth point of view, it's more logical to do it at a more granular level. So I think, yeah.
So I believe in baseline. Apropos of Sarah's comments, I believe in there should be baselines. The flexibility's got to be around the how you achieve that, rather than being prescribed how you achieve that, which the RMA was wont to do through consents and various things to tell people how that should be provided for. So I think that's another area we should on is the flexibility within our spatial strategies, but look, I'm not selling off the clear bottom lines, especially things like biodiversity and stuff. So, we still, if it's no net loss, it's no net loss, or whatever it is, but it should be clear and precise what the bottom lines are.
Agreed. And Mayor Paula, we're helpfully well connected to the Ministry for Environment on this particular topic. And one of the things that we have been working closely and encouraging them is to actually come out of Wellington and actually come and see what happens in an area such as Waikato, and potentially look to the Waikato, potentially a good case study for how the regional spatial strategy, and in particular future-proof and HUGS works in a practical sense, to understand the nuances, the challenges, but also the opportunities that we're delivering. So we continue to encourage that at the highest level, and we're getting some good interest. I guess COVID obviously creates some challenges, but we think that there's actually something we can show them here and what we're doing in future-proof and where we're heading that is potentially a really good model for the regional spatial strategies to look to replicate.
I also think the work that we did recently, Blair, council would have been on leave, but with Tauranga and having those really excellent conversations about synergies, that's where the Metro case is made across the conversation. And so councillors, I've met recently with Anne Tolley and also with Phil Goff, and actually we have a lot of synergies within our own spatial planning parameters. And that's the kind of thing that we need to share with government.
Agreed. Sarah.
Sorry, Blair, all I was going to say was we had Paula was talking about biodiversity offsetting. We had a briefing last year on the work that Future Proof was doing on that. So, but I haven't heard anything since. So it'd be good to actually hear at some point where that's got into.
Yeah, look, I was aware of that work. Sarah will follow that one up. It was certainly, I think the concept is a really interesting concept. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to look at those as a metro high growth area to find solutions. And so I think if we as Future Proof can find a pathway and take that into the regional spatial strategies framework, it'll be really helpful. So thank you. Any other questions on this one before we move to the next theme? Okay.
So just picking this up, and we've touched on it already. So I mean, these MBA plans are effectively the equivalent of district plans.
Oops, sorry.
But obviously, it's one combined regulatory plan to each region. So that's what we've talked about, that local voice being lost, those local nuances specific to Hamilton City potentially being lost. These would obviously have to fit within the bottom line and the outcomes set through the Act. So therefore, that's picking up on your earlier comment as well. Stronger requirements in terms of the principles of True Waitangi. And I guess, so the comments here were really around, these are going to be heavily directed by the new national planning framework. There's that risk of losing the localism or the local voice in terms of understanding local characteristics and responding to those. And that in turn leads to the question of Hamilton-specific issues. How do they get resolved in a nimble, sort of innovative way if we're hamstrung by a joint committee, which is made up of all the different partners, which is at a regional scale, and which is then very tightly controlled based on the national planning framework, bottom lines and things. So it really doesn't allow much flex at all at that local level. And I guess coming back to Blair's point in terms of the MDRS, there's similarities here in terms of a one-size-fits-all model, which might not actually be, deliver the best outcomes for certain places.
So Councillor Mark, right, so I just can't see who's in the chamber, but this, I think, cuts to the very heart of your question around, placemaking and So we're about to, through the District Plan Committee, talk about what our proposed response is going to be to the rules that were delivered to us in December last year, the MDRS, as Mark talked about. We're going to be coming back with a response that tailors a range of considerations within the law, what we call a nuanced Hamilton response. The question that I would put to councillors is, how do we see that playing out under this scenario here, which is a regional-wide focus? You've got this MDRS that requires to come in. Would we get the same outcome? Would we see the same nuanced Hamilton response? And I think our observation would be it will be a lot more challenging, and potentially you may get a lot more directive response that doesn't have that Hamilton metro nuance flavour in it. So I don't know if that makes sense, Councillor Mark?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. I'm just mulling that through. Thank you.
Paula, did you still have a question, or is that an old hand raise?
Old hand, sorry.
I have a question, Blair. It's Rob here from the Chamber.
Morning, Rob.
Good morning. I have been listening with interest. I must confess, I find the RMA quite challenging. But do you think that when we're talking about regional, having a regional committee, rather than relying on legislation which was nationally written, which in places is poorly drafted, and in other instances is capable of different interpretations, do you think having a regional group driving this could be a potential advantage to us, in that we could create some degree of localism around that committee that we probably haven't got with the national legislation?
Councillor Rob, if I just jump in there, I think there's two issues. One is the composition of that committee, and the fact that they're going to need to be very careful with the size of those committees. At the moment, they're talking about having each local authority having representation, local iwi and hapu representation, along with central government agency representation. So you can see this committee becoming pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. I guess first comment. Second comment is in terms of who's actually doing the planning. So local authorities will not be doing the planning anymore under the RM reform proposal as it stands. That will be undertaken by the Secretariat, which sits effectively under the joint committee or under these joint committees. So that line of sight between, I guess, your voter to your elected member to your plan maker or drafter is becoming very blurred. Would be I guess my comment around that.
Yeah. So in the discussions and the feedback that you've got to date from the officials, and I don't know which department it is in Wellington, probably DIA, who are running this. Are they agreeing with your concerns about the size of the committee, and that preference not to have one broad brush approach to a whole region when there are differences?
Well, I think we haven't really had the opportunity to actually provide robust feedback. So this is our opportunity to provide that feedback. In some earlier conversations I had with MFE beginning of December, they were aware of the unwieldy nature of their joint committees and were talking about rationalising how many people sat on them. So effectively, a couple of local authorities might have one nominee representing their interests. They were also talking about, and this comes back to the Randerson report recommendations, these joint committees being at sort of complete arm's length to the local authority. So basically providing kind of full autonomy to that joint committee.
I wonder if we just go to the next slide on the page, because I think, Councillor Rob, the topic that you've honed in on here, lots of parallels with Three Waters, and I think it really speaks to the voice of local authorities and how that voice is heard and how influential that voice is. Certainly, so first comment is it's Ministry for Environment that's leading this work, not DIA. So that's Minister David Parker's ministry. In saying that, there are lots of other parties, DIA, Ministry for Housing and Development, Treasury, Waka Kotahi are interested parties, but it is Ministry for Environment who are leading this. Yeah, and they've seconded in staff from all over Wellington into this process. They've pulled people left, right and centre from various ministries to form the teams. If I was honest, Councillor Rob, I would say that a lot of the people working on this have no idea in practice how joint committees work or how governance works in reality, or the trade-offs, or how you actually have to manage the politics. And I think a lot of our conversations, my conversation, are to help some of those officials understand practically how this works. And we only have to look at the other examples where we have in the Waikato, and you look at how much work is needed just to ensure our voice is considered and given weight to, particularly in a scenario where you have one vote. So there's reality in this theory, and I think that we're talking about reality here. So it's a long answer to your question, Councillor Rob, but it's a very real factor here.
Blair, Dave McPherson here. I think you're being far too nice and considered about this. I think this is far worse than just the one issue under the waters. It is actually a bureaucratisation of the functions of local government, of the governance functions. And there is no, if this sort of thing went ahead, and they're looking at this in amalgamation in other areas, you might as well not have an elected group of councillors of the sort we've got now. You might have 3 or 4 people to decide a couple of policies each. You might meet 3 times a year. This, the part of the problem I can see, you mentioned a whole raft of Wellington agencies that are making the decisions or putting up the white papers and the thinking here. Where are the elected members in this down in Wellington? Where are our ministers in that? They're at such a high level, so far removed, they don't have any involvement at all. And I think part of the issue is, to me, on our feedback, and sorry I came in part way through the discussion this morning, is not that we just give feedback back to the bureaucrats who are inventing this thinking, which I think was invented in Russia in 1930 odd. Actually, it's to actually go straight to the politicians and talk about the high level problems that this is going to bring with this sort of approach. There's nothing wrong with synchronisation of regional plans and plans within a region and things like that, but there's everything wrong with removing localism and local governance sort of decision-making powers. So, you know, I think you're being quite technical with this presentation, and I think the guts of the problem are sort of high-level political.
Ooh, Mac is back. Yeah.
Welcome back, Dave. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Apart from that, I did have a good break. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Look, I think Councillor Dave, you've summed it up nicely. I think that is the crux of I guess the points that we need to get across here. That we know our communities, particularly a metro community. Dave, you've sat on Future Proof for a long time. You've also seen Waikato Plan operate. You've seen Rural Former operate. This will only be successful if you get the buy-in at the local level, because ultimately what's missing here is that council still has a significant role to invest and to deliver the outcomes against these plans. And good luck in convincing the council to invest in a plan that it has no ownership in. And if you don't have ownership in that plan because you haven't been deeply part of the decision-making process and joint committee process, there's going to be a massive disconnect. So yes, you've hit the nail on the head, Councillor Dave. I'm just wondering if there's any other comments, because I certainly think
I'm worried
joint
that the standard feedback is not going to hit at the right people.
So one thing, Councillor Dave and Paula, if you're still listening, Mayor Toby in Hauraki District Council, he's co-chair of a sort of national reference group that's been established by the government, by the Minister pre-Christmas, to give a voice from local authorities at a governance level. So that's really, really helpful. And Mayor Toby, I believe, certainly from what I've seen so far, he has an appreciation of some of these issues, which is great. And obviously he's also chair of Zone 2 as well, but he's a Waikato mayor. And so Mayor Paul, I don't know if you want to pass any comments before I see Councillor Sarah's got a hand up. Paula doesn't seem to be there.
Can we get Toby over here for a meeting with us and some maybe the future-proof councils to discuss this as a sort of a forum or something like that? He's a good guy. He's familiar with, for instance, our transport issues over here.
I am here, by the way. Sorry.
Hi, Paula. Did you want to say anything?
Look, yeah, we can. I think it fits really nicely into the conversations we're having across boundaries. Zone 2 could probably be, there's a bit of a serve to Zone 2 here right coming, but Zone 2 could probably be more effective. It's certainly improved under Toby, but we've still got a way to be able to get those councils talking together at a meaningful level. Look, Dave, happy to bring Toby over. We've been having really good conversations during the break with Anne Tolley and so on too, and we've talked about sharing her voice with council as a whole as well. So I think the whole Central North Island proposition has a lot of value, and we could definitely draw some people together to talk about what's right in that context. I certainly, you weren't on the call earlier, but we were talking about the Metro case. Toby doesn't operate in the Metro, but he has those ties to the Zone 2. I think there's a real strong case for having a combined Metro views on some of the issues that we're taking to government. I know Anne Tolley's really keen, and so is Phil to some extent, although Auckland is Auckland. I certainly think Stevie Chadwick, Anne Tolley, and other sizable metros offer something in this debate. That's my view.
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, and look, Dave, we'll certainly follow that with Mayor Toby. Happy to explore that. Councillor Sarah and then Councillor Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Blair. Assuming I've heard what's heard right in terms of what's been proposed, it sounds a bit daft to me. So I guess, and I agree with previous comments from Dave. I think it would be really useful, I guess following on from Paula as well, that we're really proactive with this in terms of putting forward alternative solutions as quickly as possible. My question was, I thought Rob made some interesting points around, could there be the opportunity to kind of have almost more influence with regional approaches? Do you think there could be any scope to say, look for more influence around building codes or things? Because I guess one of the problems we have with urban design is it's not just what you can do in a district plan, but it's actually the quality of buildings going up in the first place, and that's almost even worse than some of the lack of control around the planning as such.
Well, yeah, so Councillor Thompson, I think those are things which you could put into your district plan, or as it currently stands, you could put into your district plan in terms of controls around cladding and different bits and pieces like that, if you wanted to get down into that level of detail. But I think what we're saying is that those opportunities are likely to be lost.
Well, I guess they've already been lost through the, housing density reforms to a large extent. Anyway, would only be able to, if we're able to require any specific cladding, it would only be in regard to very large developments, right?
Yeah, yes, yeah, you're right. I mean, the more effectively, this is the whole cookie cutter argument, right? The more central control or direction you're provided, the less ability local authorities have to, I guess, innovate or to come up with unique solutions to their local, whether it be from a building design point of view or whether it be from an environmental management point of view. The ability to innovate and to come up with bespoke solutions which best fit the local needs or meet local needs are in jeopardy, I suppose.
Yeah. Do you think that's worth looking at? Well, you know, in terms of these reforms, what we actually say should be devolved. I mean, hopeful thinking, but in terms of allowing more of that localism approach.
Yeah, we could in our submission. I don't know if it's this submission or a future one. We could be drawing on our examples and our experience here in the Waikato and putting a model which we think would be better and provide for those things which we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Jeff.
Yeah. Thanks, Blair. Look, I want to back up Dave really, and his, you know, in giving a mandate for real action here. I just urge us not to underplay any of this and not miss any opportunities. Don't just rely on written submissions, staff to staff type behaviour, because, you know, one after another, these things that we're going through this morning, plus Three Waters, you know, it's just a deliberate, calculated loss of localism that's happening here. You know, make no mistake, local government is under attack, and you know, we had different views respectfully on Three Waters, and that's fine. I think we're probably a lot more united in this right from the get-go, and I just think the time for being polite has honestly passed, because we are facing such a bow wave of these on a whole different levels across a whole number of areas that I think it needs to be political basically every time as much as possible, you know. Yeah, so I just want to back up Dave there. I think this is urgent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's really helpful comment. Mark, did you want to cover any more on joint committees?
I feel like we've sort of traversed the joint committees a bit already, but I'm happy to, looking down there, I think we've covered most of what this slide sets out.
I think one of the unresolved issues under the joint committee is where do they sit, where are they housed? There's options that suggest that the regional council becomes the home of the joint committee.
No.
Can we watch you delete that from the presentation as we speak, please?
Well, look, it is a very, it's a one of the options that's been considered. So,
Blair, could I comment on that? Some of us have had quite a bit of experience the last few years, even with a friendly regional council, as having joint committees of varying types under their wing, and it's a bloody nightmare. They don't have proper processes. They don't have standing orders in place. They pick and choose who's allowed to speak, who's allowed to be represented, even from other councils. All of those sorts of things, and that's with I say the friendliest local council, probably regional council we've had overall. Of course, you were friendly when you were there, Paula, but some of the others weren't so friendly. But seriously, they are also, the makeup of them, and this is something I want to raise in terms of the joint committee, they've got 4 out of 14 from 50% of the population, Hamilton, on their council, and that's reflected in their whole organisation. That's why they're concerned about issues that are outside the CBD, outside the metro areas, so more than disproportionately, and I think that flavour will go into any anything they manage with the best will in the world. I think it's really important it's not like that. Maybe follow the future-proof pattern, which is where the councils are they are just one of the councils or one of the groups that end up feeding into this, whatever process is set up. That would be a better bet and something we could hang our hat on. I think smart growth is somewhat similar over in Bay of Plenty as well in that sense, Blair, but we'll have to put up an alternative, I guess, but please stay away from the regional council as being the home of this.
Yes, and I think, Councillor Dave, that the sort of the future-proof model is another model that has been talked about, and certainly I'd agree with you. That is a more balanced model in terms of providing that workability. I think the other element to consider here is that the success of any of these joint committees is only as successful as the wraparound that goes around to support it in terms of all the work that happens. And Councillor Dave, you'll appreciate how much work goes on behind the scenes to ensure future-proof works together in as united as possible fashion, including council direct meetings, senior staff, technical staff, discussions that occur outside the meeting. It isn't simply just a joint committee that comes together. And I think that, again, our role to educate the ministries and the ministers that are sort of considering this is going to be really important to see how a successful joint partnership can work versus how a not successful joint partnership operates. So I think we've got lots of lessons in the Waikato that we can show here around done well versus possibly not done well. The other part, just to quickly touch on, is, and Mark's made a comment there around resourcing of these committees and the management. So again, the detail is not clear, but I think that you can envisage that a number of our planning teams would not be of the size or scale they are now, because they would be effectively enveloped by this new structure, whatever it looks like. And so the local Hamilton thinking, knowledge, planning capacity would not be there.
So just if I could just add to that, please. I mean, I think that's really interesting from the point of view of infrastructure delivery. And joined up responses to things. So, I mean, the Auckland example is a prime example of difficulties of splitting out functional, silos, like Auckland Transport and Water Care, and separating them from the planning function, because it just becomes so difficult to manage and so difficult to respond in a sort of agile manner. So that's a real risk of splitting out the planning functions from the local authorities.
Mayor Paul, I see you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, I'm in the garage, so you need to see me, but I'm on my way in. Just in terms of this, the regional council has a role to play in terms of its expertise, and that is, again, as I say, primarily around national resources management. So it's finding a way for that to join better with the urban councils. I mean, the difficulty about a joint committee is good, but you will find, and I've experienced this when I was on the regional council, that the case for change, the needs and the desires of the metros, the provincial and the rural pull against each other quite often. And so it's a matter of finding a joint committee that brings all matters to the table in a fair and equitable way. And the regional council should bring their environmental and resource management expertise to the table. But as I say, I don't think in the past they've necessarily demonstrated any depth of urban planning. That's clearly where we excel. So that's my view on that one.
And I think, thank you, Paula. I think that's pretty what Councillor Dave was articulating earlier, Dave, wasn't it? That our urban metro needs are very different from those of the wider region.
It's those issues being addressed at the appropriate spatial scale. So those urban specific issues related to Hamilton should be dealt with, or are best dealt with at that local Hamilton scale, not at a regional scale.
And I think the closing comment I would just make is for those councillors who were on council or will recall the Waikato plan in its earlier days, when it was a joint committee of every council plus iwi plus government, and it was probably into the mid-20s of members, trying to do a sort of spatial plan for the Waikato, just could never get across the line, because it became every council, everyone wanted something in it for themselves, and you effectively traded off, and you got a series of trade-offs, but actually no real demonstrable outcomes. So I know Councillor Martin's in the chamber. Councillor Dave, you'll recall it well. And so effectively, this has the potential of that pathway if not done well. We're going to move on to the next slide unless there's any other comments or questions. Okay. Oh, sorry.
So, have you done this yet? No, I don't think so. So the role of the local government, again, we've sort of traversed this to some extent already. Local government's role will fundamentally change, based on the proposed reforms. The languaging coming out of the MFE and others is that local government will become a partner in the planning process and no longer the owner, and that they will be required to fund the operation of the joint committees and the secretariat in order to effectively produce the plan and run the process. And sort of just outline some issues there in the box below, and some things again touched on in terms of Hamilton benefits greatly from being able to take a one metro view and focus on those urban issues at the appropriate scale. Splitting the planning functions away from local authorities. So I'm just cherry picking a couple of these. Splitting out planning functions from the local authority, I think, actually hobbles the local authority's ability to deliver for its local communities, because the various functions have to go hand in hand. And I touched on the infrastructure example just earlier. And I think Blair, you've made this comment already in terms of the ownership of the plan is actually really fundamental in terms of its implementation. If there isn't a clear line of sight, accountability and ownership over that plan, its successful implementation will be, at risk.
I'm just wondering whether, before we take any questions, Grant, whether yourself or Mel had any comments, because your team, I guess, under the scenario, is the front line of giving effect to any plans. Could you or Mel want to make any further comments?
Yeah, Mel, did you want to make any comment?
I think in terms of, thanks, Blair. I think in terms of just local government, I think the main thing in terms of from the consenting field will be just basically really increasing workforce in terms of actually looking at what's actually permitted, and basically actually trying to monitor some of the aspects which are basically sort of governance in some ways, because a lot of things will be actually permitted by the plan, and by then our role is reactive rather than actually being proactive.
Yeah, so the compliance, the monitoring side, Mel, really will be quite significant. And I think, Councillor Sarah, that speaks to your earlier comment around some of the risks that we may face, and that our hand on the tiller is more a case of possibly responding after things have happened. It'll be a very permissive directive framework.
One question. So is the point of this approach, are they thinking it's simplifying things? Is that what they're trying to achieve? Because
I think, Council, that's a really good point and strikes at the heart of this, right? What are the outcomes, different outcomes that this whole reform program is trying to achieve? And I guess my question would be, well, is it fundamentally going to change any of the land use outcomes or anything else that we have in play at the moment? Or might it even actually lead to worse planning outcomes than what we currently see under the current system?
So the original objectives were less complexity and better outcomes, was sort of what it was framed as. And I guess I guess what the team, Councillor Sarah, are just raising here is that in practice it might be less complex, but the outcomes could actually be poorer for our community as a result.
It's clear that some issues have been identified, and again, I think the RMA has become a bit of a beating sort of horse, if you like, in terms of things that might be going wrong, but overlooking the fact that these are really complex trade-offs we're making. We're making trade-offs every day between the environment and growth and development, community aspirations and things. We're trying to balance a whole lot of different stuff, and that's what's playing out. That's why it's complex. And I think what Minister Parker is doing here is coming in with a legislative solution. Oh, it's not working, so we'll just legislate something different to make it work without really going to what the nub of the issue or the problem is.
Yeah. Okay. Because it sounds like, so is the idea, like I say, if you're trying to reduce complexity, that by having this regional approach, you would have one plan and there would be some standardization across that area? Is that so that no matter where you are in the Waikato, it's the same rules? Is that what they're looking at, or are there other benefits that they're perceiving in terms of that application?
I think that's certainly one of them, but it's a little bit unclear as to exactly what the benefits of what they're putting forward are. So, for example, we already have national planning standards, right, which came into effect a few years ago, which are standardising all the zones across the country. We have that under the RMA. We're all having to give effect to that, so we get some consistency with zoning approach. Wouldn't be a fast step, and in fact they've gone there already with the NDS stuff. It wouldn't be a fast step to go from there to here are your zones, and here are the rules as to what you can do under them. So again, there would be a level of consistency. So you know, the reason or the driver for the bureaucratic or bureaucracy changes that they're proposing here is a little bit unclear, I think, where from my point of view, I see a lot of what they're talking about here already being rolled out under the current sort of legislation.
I think, Sarah, I mean, as a country, there are some big issues that we have to face up to, and I think, you know, done well, this reform could help us face up to some of those issues, such as climate change, carbon reduction, the ability to deliver infrastructure that's more affordable, removing duplication of things, making some hard decisions around where development can occur versus where it can't occur, and so potentially saying certain parts of the country or certain communities you can't have that, and those decisions are made at a more regional lens as opposed to every district making those decisions and one having their own sort of their own slice of the cake. So there are some big decisions that need to be made spatially, but equally what may occur is that you may see very prescriptive directive standards occur that then deliver in its purest form really poor outcomes for communities. So if you take the legislation that was delivered pre-Christmas in its purest form, I don't think any of us would be happy with that in the Hamilton context, in terms of 3 stories, 3 dwellings anywhere. So and that is the risk of this approach. The other comment I'd make here is that if you're anyone who has any interest in any development plan, land use, the battleground will be these plans when they are first formed. So the Regional Spatial Strategy and the NBA plan, those will be a highly contested, highly litigious process, because if you're anyone who wants to do anything, that'll be where you set your sights, because once those plans are in play, effectively, as Mel has said, the framework will be very enabling. So you will see every potential piece of future development interest, landowner interest, popped up in that regional process. And so, you know, if we look at the future-proof process and those things at the moment, it'll be that on steroids. Because if you can win your case there, effectively the plan will be quite permissive. From that point.
And there's a risk that the best resourced, you know, landowners and developers are the ones that get the outcomes that they want, potentially in conflict with what community wants, right? Like it's, so you need a very strong framework from the beginning with your very clear outcomes before you get to that process. Correct.
And some could say that occurs now, but you've got the local lens and our knowledge to counteract that, whereas this is at a regional level, it becomes a lot harder, particularly where if there's a joint committee with, say, one voice for your region or your community, your voice is having to be heard across all the other voices as well. So.
Hey, Mark, I'm conscious there's only about 8 minutes left. Are you able to maybe just sort of get onto that last slide around the funding and kind of any points on that, and then we'll sort of try to wrap up sort of any final questions after that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So just funding. So lastly, this is a bit of I guess a bit of a blind spot, if you like, in terms of the reform program. It's not really going there in terms of funding, which I think is actually one of the underlying issues, which is why we're having the whole RM reform debate in the first place. And sort of to make matters worse, they're talking about connecting the funding to the LTPs and annual plans to the regional spatial strategies, which in my mind is not the right level for those to be at. I mean, you need a certain degree of certainty in terms of your funding decisions, that you're going to be getting X amount of houses in X area, certain amount of revenue. You need to be certainty as to where that growth is going to go in terms of what infrastructure and the cost of that infrastructure is going to be required. So I think this is a bit of a grey area at the moment in terms of what I've seen come through, and certainly an area I think we need to, I guess, highlight going forward.
I guess there's just to add to that as well, another kind of blind spot so far is around if central government is making up half the committee that's deciding on these regional spatial strategies. There's no clarity about where central government funding sits in this, what their commitment is or obligation is to align their individual, ministry and agency planning with those regional spatial strategies. At the moment, it just references, what local government should do. But if they're sitting on that, surely, the implementation agreements that are signalled, we need to have that certainty from central government as well. So that's a big part of it.
And I think the final comment I would just make is any planning framework is only effective when you've got the funding to deliver against that. And council's LTP process sits separate from the decision making around these regional plans. And so I guess the assumption of the reform is that councils will invest in support of those plans, but that assumes that the councils are happy with the final plans that may be determined by a committee that you've only got a small voice on. So there is a disconnect between funding to give effective plans and who makes the decision on the plans. And I guess, as Marcus said, it's a gap in the thinking at the moment. So just happy to take any questions or comments on that. That is the end of our presentation.
So Blair, I have a comment, if I may, or a question, comment, / whatever it is.
Please.
Thank you. It's Paula here. I'm in the chamber now. So just in terms of what you were saying, the funding, which I think is a critical slide, this has to go hand in glove with any feedback that we give central government, and I know we're going down in a month or so, to talk about infrastructure and the big impost on councils of infrastructure, because at the end of the day, the plans are the plans, and will conform, and a plan will be put in place, and it will drive our business. But the biggest gap is actually the funding gap, which fits into all of these requests we're making of government to fund infrastructure. And having spoken with Infrastructure New Zealand, Property Council New Zealand, Water New Zealand, and a number of other people lately, the costs coming are eye-watering. And I think it popped up on the screen today that Wellington is looking at a 9.1% rates increase this year, just by the way. And so, you have to get the money from somewhere. And so unless we join up this conversation about the reform process and the costs that go with it, vis-a-vis the most important and incredibly eye-watering costs of infrastructure, we'll only have a plan we can't deliver on. So I see these things as hand in glove.
Yes, I quite agree, Paula. And I think that we can't assume that the Three Waters reform will occur, and even if it does, it will deliver the golden solution to help with this. But certainly, we know from all our experience, and we'll talk about this through the District Plan Committee and Strategic Growth Committee, there's a massive disconnect between what our plans desire, what government desires, and how much we can actually effectively afford to deliver to respond to other considerations.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm just conscious of our time. Paula, governance, we've come in just 3 minutes before our scheduled finish. So unless there's any further questions, our next step is that this discussion document / submission is coming back to Chair Angela, an item at your committee, Infrastructure Ops. It's coming to your committee because it's the closest committee to the close-off date for the submissions, which is the end of the month. So thank you for allowing that to come as an item on your agenda. So I think that's 24th of this month. So we'll circulate and socialise an earlier draft of that with the key representatives as it comes together. But thank you, Councillors, me and Paula. I think that's the end of our presentation.
So thanks, Ewan, for running the shop here. It's good. Or whoever was. Oh, we're kind of like a self-running ship, really, aren't we? We don't need a captain all the time. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks to staff. We appreciate it. Well, I think we're having a tea break, aren't we now, Sean? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's the end of that item. Yep. So tea break and then transport centre rejuvenation at 11:15.
All right.
We may not have a job at the end of all of this
Yes, so facial expressions can be seen.
It's actually, yeah, the way they've got it set up now is pretty darn good.
So, morena, everybody. Nice to see everybody. We decided to come in face to face this morning just because of the number of elected members in the chamber, but also because there are, hopefully the sound quality is good on Zoom too. So
it is, and I can see your beautiful face.
Oh, good.
And Martin Park's beautiful face.
Yeah.
And we can.
What about my beautiful face?
Can't see your beautiful face right now, Ewan.
Oh, we can. Oh, there it is.
Now I can. Wow, that's fantastic.
And we can see your enormously large apricot.
I'm so sorry, but well done, team. What a huge difference.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Whenever you start talking, the camera tracks.
Does it do it
Testing. I'm just going to test that theory. Maybe not to Maxine.
No,
oh, look. Here we are. Kia ora.
Can I
Thank
try
you.
that? Dun, 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 dun.
What happens when you start talking at once?
Yeah. Every family has an idiot, but I think we found that.
Yeah, we've got 14 of them, so move on.
So this discussion topic today is I have Martin Parks and also Jared Hatwell, who is the project manager for the Transport Centre Rejuvenation project. This briefing is just an opportune time for us before we progress with our design services for the Transport Centre. It's the right time for us to come back and get elected member guidance on the original scope of the Transport Centre business case and contract in terms of the outcomes that will be delivered, that were discussed back in April 2021. So when you're thinking in COVID terms, it's quite a significant time ago, but also our council has implemented a number of environmental principles, etc., that we think just need to reflect back on the outcomes. And so the purpose of this briefing is just to reconfirm the scope prior to Martin and Jared going out to look at the design of the Transport Centre and get elected member feedback to make sure the concept design that was agreed back in April is still where we need to go. Bearing in mind that the Transport Centre Rejuvenation project is exactly that. We have an existing Transport Centre. This is a renewal of the Transport Centre, and it is that short-term 10 to 15 year sort of life of the Transport Centre, pending all of the conversations that we're having around the Metro Spatial Plan and all the transport links for the future from 30 to 100 years that will be required. So I'll hand it over to Martin.
Thank you very much. I think just to let you know that we have been out for expressions of interest on this project. So we've done that phase. But yeah, as Evelisa said, we're just checking in now to make sure before we go out to get tenders in for the design services that we've got everything and right, and we've not missed anything that you feel is relevant. Since we did the business case, oh crikey, it's nearly 12 months ago that we were sort of wrapping up the business case. The world has changed quite a bit with COVID, and obviously climate change stuff and environmental issues, and we just want to make sure that we're still ticking the right boxes, bearing in mind, as Evelisa says, the timelines with regards to how long this transport centre is going to remain in its current location. So we don't necessarily want to over-capitalise our investment in the rejuvenation project. I think some of the key priorities that through the business case and discussions with you guys were around the personal security and safety at the transport centre has been key, and I think that's been highlighted again through some of the issues that we've had down there in the last sort of 9-10 months. There are obviously ongoing safety issues there that the project is looking to address. You know, a better experience down there all round we were looking to try and achieve through this project as well by, you know, the weather is an issue. Exposure to the elements as you're waiting for buses is not particularly pleasant, but, you know, and enclosing that whole area, does it then throw up some issues around how we manage things like the pandemic going forward as well. So there's lots of things to consider through the detailed design of this project going forward. So if there's any issues like that you want us to look at in any more detail through the tender process, then please let us know today.
So just to add, and I've just been reminded, this project has been in place since around 2017, where it was originally included in the 2018-28 LTP. Thank you, Councillor McPherson, for reminding me of that. And also it's taken up to April 2021 to have approval from Waka Kotahi to be co-investors in the rejuvenation of the transport centre. So it has taken us a long time to get to this point. So it's very exciting. Originally they did turn us down, yes. So we'll manage questions, and I can't see Zoom landers, so Carmen, I will rely on you to let us know if that's okay. Okay, I'm not too sure who was first. Me.
Yeah, I think I might have been actually. If that's okay.
That's fine.
Just want to pick you up on something. My ears perked up a bit there before I ask questions about personal safety, and that is, you said we're not sure how long it's going to be there for. Is there any discussion about it being somewhere else in town?
I think it's been sort of talked about previously, particularly through the business case process, that due to other things that are occurring around the central city area, and future developments, is that transport centre in the right location, and that will be looked at as part of, you know, I suppose the master plan for the central city and the Metro Spatial plan work that's being done at the moment. Therefore, we did put it was stipulated through your guys' agreement that essentially this transport centre rejuvenation would be an investment for a 10 to 15 year period, 15 years max.
Yeah.
So that's where we're pitching A, the finances, and B, the design.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. No, that's cool. So we are pretty safe to budget for the next 15 years. Cool. All right. Now, on the personal safety, I saw it's been noted here. It's probably a good time to ask questions on how exactly the design is going to improve the safety for, say, my son going down there without getting, you know, his wallet flogged or his shoes flogged, because it seems at the moment it's one of the unsafest places in town. So how is the design going to, what have you done with the design to make it a little bit safer?
So we haven't got into obviously the detailed design at this stage. I mean, that's the next step after this briefing, is to go out to tender to get a consultant to help us with that. But through the concept design, we were looking at really opening up the existing building. There's a lot of little corridors and nooks and crannies, and the toilets are hidden around the back of some offices, and it just is rife for that type of antisocial behaviour to occur in that type of environment. So
that's what it's attracting it, the nooks and crannies and,
it's
and the like?
It's that sort of late 90s design that's now, if you go into modern transport facilities like they've got in Christchurch or up in Manukau, the spaces are a lot more open and light and airy, and you lose those opportunities for people to hide away or do some unsavoury behaviour that can't be seen. There'll be a lot more security around sort of CCTV and lighting. So those sorts of things will add into the design as well. So, you can be assured that that's a really high priority for us going forward.
So is there any thought to moving our City Safe guys back there and City Safe cameras, or for personnel, or is that something you're going to be entertaining, perhaps?
So that is I guess, guidance we're wanting to get from elected members, because now's the opportunity to actually, for elected members to provide guidance as to what types and who you would like to see at the Transport Centre and what those beneficial partnerships are, and whether it could be a location that may be viable for the New Zealand Police or any of the conversations that you're already having under the task force. And so there are, those opportunities are definitely there for the future understanding. So it's not just a space for council staff to be in. Actually, how do we make it a safe environment so it's safe for parents to want to let their children use, and they know that there is protection around them when they are there.
Well, could I lay that on the table as something I'd firmly like to explore? And you could even swap the parking people over with them if there was a space thing, because I think they would have a really strong role just being there. But I'll leave that for others to discuss anyway. So thank you. Thanks, Martin. I'm really happy with those answers. Cool. Thanks, Paula.
Off that and taking it to a high level too. You referred to a task force group that we've only just had. We had a very good meeting. Mark's on that group, but the inspector Andrea Macbeth is leading that from a police perspective, and it includes myself, but it also most recently includes Tainui, have come to the table, and really helpful, the crime science division of the University of Waikato. So they're on board, and that's not to replace all the other bits not lowered down. The other bits of really important work that are happening with City Safe, community patrols, neighbourhood watch support, other things like that. It's to find an overall framework. So what I want to say about the Transport Centre is we've already, when we had our whiteboard session, we already identified the Transport Centre as a key concern for both ourselves and the police. And we're talking about the top police. We're not, this is having huge sway with the police. We talked a lot about CPTED and how, as a council, we need to bring that to the table fundamentally at the very early stages. So I would expect those stakeholders, the police and the University of Waikato, through their very clever doctorate and master students, being part of that thinking rather than dropping down into, we'll put a bigger window in or whatever. The whole thing has to be designed with safety front and centre, and the only way we'll get that is if we're working with the experts in the field, because no disrespect, we won't be experts on all aspects of that, and it'll be really useful. I think we're having our next meeting in a couple of weeks, Mark. We're just bringing all those stakeholders to the table. It would be really useful to understand from the police perspective what we're trying to solve there, and that's a conversation that the rest of the council have not been privy to, because yes, you're right about the design of the centre, but there are some other reasons why crime is attracted there and even continues on the buses themselves as they roll out of the station. So all of that needs to be seen in a holistic lens. And I really hope that this safety task force group will jump off the work that Angela and so on did in the previous term and give everything some directive. I'd hate to see this built before we've got that in track. I don't want to delay it, but I want to have the very best safety design, not some retrofit. I want this to be future-proof and safe, and I want the experts to help design that. And we haven't advanced that conversation other than generally with the police, have we, Mark? We had that.
It's obviously time to jump in and get that feedback from that safety task force group. So did you say there was a meeting coming up again soon?
Yeah. So we just were trying, because it's on a Friday, because Inspector Macbeth's availability is key. But it was really key also that for the wider piece of work, the police do take a pivotal lead, because they are the crime prevention agency that is paramount, right? Yep. So yes, we haven't got it coming up. We can talk to James. And we certainly have that as identified as a key topic, so we can bring the right technical staff from our team with the police, with the university together.
So are we able to come along to that meeting and have a chat about the Transport Centre and pick up
we'll find a way to do that.
Yeah, it'd be really useful.
Within the meeting. Yeah, it's just because of January and various things, decommissioning their borders and stuff, and with Auckland, the police got a bit busy, but we are back on track.
That's great.
What sort of timeline do we have for this?
So I think the timeline needs to incorporate the safety aspects. So I don't, like in terms of rushing through this, I think that those safety aspects are actually critical to the success of the Transport Centre project, is what I'm hearing. And so I think we just need to take that time to understand what that is, and we'll work through a process as to how we get that feedback through that task force.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of this meeting.
It's quite an exciting opportunity to showcase how we build for the very best crime prevention results.
In terms of the timing process, rather than you guys answering everyone who speaks, collect up the thoughts, then do some sort of collect at the end, because as well, I'm here and I think some other people in the room are, and about 4 up there too on Zoom. I don't know who's next.
Councillor O'Leary is next, and then Councillor Ryan, followed by Dave. So point taken. We'll just take the notes and then we'll sum up at the end.
Thanks, Evelisa. Just a couple of questions. So for I've read the discussion document. For the report coming to IOC, in terms of regional council pulling out of that space and some of the ideas around city safe, are you going to have time? I'd be interested in a conversation about eyesight as well, or anything else that could be an option, because I think the last time, quite some time ago now, that I heard some commentary on eyesight was that it wasn't working in Arts Post and we were running out of space. So, and I know that nationally there's that review of eyesight happening as well. So I don't know if that's an option, but if you could include some commentary in the report for discussion, that'd be great. Just in terms of City Safe, I support where Mark's going with that, but the only issue for me would be that it would just be an extra space for City Safe, not take them out of the Genesis building, right? Because that's fit for purpose and is exceptional being there with civil defence. I think, Mark, was that what you were leaning towards, not actually moving them out of Genesis building? Just having a presence.
Yeah, I'm just after a presence there.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, fully supportive of that. Just question, Martin. I'd be thrilled if we could get this to be a green build renew as well, in terms of environmental outcomes and solar panels and water saving and things. Do we have flexibility in the budget when you go out to tender for that? Because we really only touched on it lightly. We were so focused on safety and accessibility and functionality. We didn't really talk a lot about our desires for that. You don't have to answer it now then, maybe just commentary in the report for IOC, and that will answer my question. And then the only other thing, sorry to my dear friend Mark Bunting, you've asked for us to think about, in the discussion document, about digital billboards at the centre. I wouldn't be supportive of them for advertising. For me personally, I think any digital information boards should be focused on adding value and service for the Transport Centre users, particularly for visually impaired and the disability sector. So that's where I'm leaning on that question that was in the document. Other than that, that's it. Thank you. Everybody's silent. Was I on mute the whole time?
No, no, we have duly taken your points down. Thank you very much. That was good feedback. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Evelisa. Yeah, look, largely similar themes to what's been already said in terms of safety, and so really pleased to see that's underway. I guess just a comment around lighting. When I was trying to push for more lighting in Garden Place, one of the issues was infrastructure wasn't in place to allow better lighting at the time. So I guess just making sure that around that tender design, that if lighting upgrade is going to be a key part of it, that the infrastructure to support it is there at the start. And what I'm driving at is also nighttime. When you drive by at night, that lighting is still visible, and obviously that feeds into the SIPTED stuff and the safety. But I guess whilst this needs to be functional and accessible and safe, which I'm 100% in support, it's also a chance to continue to add value to the CBD aesthetically. So I do want to make sure we maintain that looking really good, looking attractive. Obviously, all the work we're doing around transport, this has to be the hub and it has to be a draw card. So I guess that's one point. Totally support Councillor Angela on eyesight. I think that's just a really sensible solution in terms of possibly integrating, but also it makes sense from an events point of view, getting transport to those things, the functionality, it all marries up. But I guess the only part that I probably disagree with her is the digital billboarding potentially, because that could actually sit in well with promoting internal events to council, and whether it's at the theatre or the sports stadium or that sort of thing. So it could actually, to her point, support good messaging, and especially if it's not council owned, then at least potentially council can earn an income off of it. So I think there would need to be some stipulations around that. Yeah, I think that's all for me. So thank you. Looking forward to seeing it progress.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Dave, and then we have Councillor Sarah's next.
Thanks. Look, I'm a bit concerned on top of some discussions we had last year that we've got 3 HCC people here. We've got no one from the regional council, as far as I'm aware, no one from Wakakotahi, because we're bringing up some important things that might change the scope of the work a bit, and they are not here. It's a public transport centre. It's 50% funded by Wakakotahi. I'm sick of them saying yes or no to things or going off on their own tangents. We've been trying to work this all together, and so that's a criticism, if you like, just to start the year off, that they are not involved in this discussion or not hearing what's being said here. And following some of the things that Paula and Ryan have said, I'm wondering whether we're too limited in our scope. If it's for 10 to 15 years we're doing this, I'd think let's stick some good paint jobs up and let's plan for actually a new centre that is fit for purpose. It was built in 2001. It's not the late 90s. Maybe it wasn't even thought of then. It wasn't even a gleam in anyone's eye, Martin, in those years. But yeah, but it's got the problems you talk about, but it's got some good points too. I mean, it could be with the roof line and the shape and that, it could be something quite good and quite central, which is another reason, and I sound like I'm straying a bit here, that I'm totally disappointed. I was going to say a much ruder word with the intersection of Bryce Street outside there, that we spent megabucks on and got nothing except 2-inch higher seal in the middle. It's still black and it still doesn't tell you anything, but it's a good place to drive cars through. So I don't know whether anything can be done with that, but I would like Ryan's saying, to make the whole precinct to look like something that's uplifting the city, not that something that you pass through as quickly as possible. Safety points are important, which is why I was a bit concerned to hear a big chunk of the regional council looking at moving out. I wasn't aware of that, because I think having people working there is, if you have the right design, internal design, is actually good for safety and security. Obviously the thin corridors and things like that don't help, but if you could improve that, it would be good. I'm sort of disappointed that we've put some of our transport people in City Safe in the Genesis building. So we helped someone else get a good design, but we're not helping ourselves get a good design. We could have spent some of that money on really uplifting the transport centre, and maybe thinking ahead, we ought to be looking at some stuff like that. So I'm really saying maybe it's not just a redesign, some new shade sails, and things like that, which maybe we can do them anyway, but in terms of the building itself, we might want to look a little bit further ahead. I've seen some ones that, like you're talking about, Eva-Lisa, that are open, and Martin, open and you can see everything that's going on within the building, like airport lounge type things, which that isn't quite. That was the original intention, but didn't quite achieve it. So maybe we ought to look at something a little bit more like that. And there is room to open it out a bit, I would have thought, and make it more like a hub for the city rather than just a public transport hub. But we need we need to look at that whole area over there. We've got from the Ward Street through to the back of the transport centre, includes the Genesis building and the Regional Council building and things like that. Clearly the city's growing that way a bit at the moment. We've got the potential also of the railway line and the future. While I don't want us to build the connection to the railway line at the moment, we have to work out where it's going to be and preserve the access and things like that. And there's two possibilities. One, basically a block either side of that we've talked about, plus where it is right now. So I'm not sure how that's fitting in. So I guess I'm raising far more questions than I'm trying to put solutions up, but I'm just wondering whether we need to tie-ho a bit on the building changes, except perhaps the weatherproofing of the waiting areas might be something you could go ahead with, and look more at the precinct, how it fits with security. The police, all very well them wanting to be involved now, but they in the past have had people down there and moved them out. Because they had a sudden policy change in Wellington or something, they got rid of local, CBD patrols and whatnot and things like that. So we'd want some sort of acknowledgement that they're part of they're going to, whatever decision they make is going to be a part of a joint decision, not their own sort of operational changes that from time to time. Yeah, so anyway, just a few little comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite hard kind of having limited time and not much chance for discussion, because I guess I would be, given we're putting something for 10, 15 years, but not sure if it's the right place and we have that kind of work to do, I guess I just want more comfort that it's the right thing to go this far with the rejuvenation, if really we should be looking at like moving the transport centre somewhere else, and then what. So I just want, in terms of the level of investment and the amount of time that's potentially going to be there, just more comfort that this is the right, I guess, path we're going down right now. In terms of the building itself, I think that, yeah, I agree with a lot that's already been said. In terms of the green infrastructure, I was a little surprised because I raised it when we were doing initial workshops and was kind of told it was just part of the detail. So not that it was additional scope. And I think that we should at least be looking for some opportunities for leadership, even if it's not perfect. If we're able to showcase a couple of things and even work with local businesses where if there's some kind of innovative solution, like partly a green roof, or it might be a water system or something, that we can actually use as an opportunity to educate others around what solutions are available, if that makes sense. So it really should be a leadership opportunity. In terms of City Safe, I would be keen to have the conversation with Waikato Regional Council around us, say, co-funding, actually having an additional City Safe person, so that we've got presence there on almost like a full-time basis. Like I think they come and go at the moment, but I think that given safety is such a big issue, that we should be talking to Regional Council about that. And in terms of the billboards, I like the idea of having useful information that's relevant to Hamilton, what you can do, and etc. But I'm cautious around having too much in there that is going to be distracting or kind of obnoxious because we want people to enjoy the space. And so I'd like to have some good thought put into it in terms of any recommendations that come to us, because ultimately it's, you know, for what revenue we get from, say, a billboard inside, is it worth the kind of the impact that it's having on people's enjoyment of the space? And finally, trees and greenery, please. Like, we're talking about it adding amenity, and that is the one thing that always adds amenity, is something green outside. So I can see there's a little bit, but it's not clear how much. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah. So Councillor Rob, then Councillor Kesh.
Thanks, Evelisa. Look, I'm harping back to perhaps the comments of both Sarah and Dave. I think we need to have some care and skill in what we actually undertake here. It's a rejuvenation rather than a rebuild, and I would hate to think that we're going to be pouring gold over a 20-year-old building that might only have a 10 to 15-year life. So I agree wholeheartedly with Dave that I think we need to get around the table with Waka Kotahi, who are 50% funders, and the Regional Council, and see what outcomes we can achieve that are commensurate with a 15-year, maybe 20-year by the time we get around to doing anything in terms of changes on what we can do to this building to make it usable for another 20 years. I think the safety issue could be addressed by perhaps, and I'm not trying to simplify it here because I know that it is a problem, but by moving around some of the internal fittings within the building, you might be able to achieve, and you know, there are some very experienced designers and people like Lance Burdett and a few others who can identify ways in which you can manage the internal part of a building that does create these safe spaces. And I don't want to say it's as easy as moving a few internal fittings around, because it may not be, but at least that might be an approach to consider looking at now, rather than a whole redesign that that perhaps does the job but costs a lot more money than what we would want to spend on the remaining life of the building and the site. That's by me.
Thank you, Councillor Rob. Councillor Kesh.
Thank you. And it's so good to hear everyone so clearly. Even the little whispers are coming through quite clearly, so it's quite cool. I just want to add to the conversation, in terms of security. I'm sure everyone has seen the online comments and all of that around security, especially of our young people, and how safe they feel actually, to use the centre. The other thing I did hear from the local police was that they've run out of space at the police station, and I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to have them lease a portion of the centre to have that continued police presence. I think there's an opportunity there. I want to support Ryan's comment around lighting, in terms of promoting safety. And also just a comment around the future plan. 10 to 15 years is not a very long time. And I think that we should be having those larger scale conversations quite soon, not only involving Waka Kotahi and the Regional Council, but also we should, I think, be talking to Tainui and their plans for their central city rail connection, and how the transport centre can link into a centralised transport centre, if that's what you call it. Yeah, because I think it would be quite cool for that entire precinct to be, you know, a connection hub. Thanks, Evelisa.
Thank you, Councillor Kesh. So I think that is all of the questions and guidance. So we will take those away and summarise those up. So there was a lot of really good feedback, particularly around safety, the design of the centre, working with our partners and not to be the experts of that, actually get some really clear guidance from the groups that are already communicating with us. And actually making sure that it is a rejuvenation, and so it's actually taking that care as to what we are looking into. And I know that Martin and Jared have been thinking about that already, but the primary outcome is making sure the security and safety is there, and that we design it well, and taking the opportunities of billboards and the green space, and showing leadership in both the space, the location, making it a facility that we're proud to have in the central city, and actually builds that want to come in. And also, I had another thought there, solar powering and all of the energy emission and what we can do there. And also show leadership and accessibility, and making sure that it is a space for everybody to be able to comfortably use. There's only one point I'd like to just cover off, was the request for Regional Council in Wakakotahi, in terms of from Councillor Dave. That was, we didn't ask them to come, so unfortunately that is out on us, and so we'll take that on board for any future discussions in terms of the transport centre. I think that's a really good point, that to show partnership and collaboration it is to have them at the table with us, so we'll definitely take that back. Thank you for that.
The chamber's just gone all mute.
Apologies, Councillor Ryan, that's just because no one has their mic on at this time. So we're just looking at swapping the presenters, and then we'll be right back.
The lecture never sounded a lot better actually on mute.
We'll pass that feedback on.
Councillor Ryan, tread very carefully. You will have to come into this. You will have. Not only do we have the ability to mute you permanently, but you will have to come and play with us eventually.
Yeah, noted.
Hello. Kia ora. Welcome. So, maybe. So, this next briefing is about how we'd like to spend the additional funding that you kindly gave us before Christmas as a Christmas present towards extra cycling and public transport infrastructure. But before I start the presentation, I'd like to introduce Honor Young, sitting at the far end of the table here. I'm not sure if you know Honor, but Honor is one of the driving forces behind the active modes and sustainable transport in the city, and she's been rolling out some pretty cool projects over the last 12, 18 months around the city, so she should be proud of what she's achieved so far. And she'll probably do a bit of talking on these projects as well. I think she knows a little bit more about them than I do. But not sure what I've done wrong there, Carmen. Oh, there we go. Can you see that on your screens? Or is it seems to have disappeared off there? Yes, it is, sorry. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you. So, what we would like from you today from this briefing is to basically approve these projects that we're going to talk through. Sorry. Endorse? Support?
Seek feedback.
Seek feedback on the projects that that we're going to go through today. But there's a report going to the Infrastructure Ops Committee on the 24th of February for formal approval to carry on with these projects. So the reason we've chosen these projects is because they are at a state currently where we've got a good chance of delivering them before the end of the financial year, and that's why we picked them. They are sort of priority projects, but they are reasonably well advanced as well. And obviously the money you've given us is only available till the end of this current financial year. And we'd like to start with one of the projects we've been working on over probably the last 12 months. It's we call it the Claudin's East project. It's, as you're probably familiar with, the intersection layout outside Claudin's Event Centre. It's quite complex with a couple of intersections plus the railway crossing, and there's a lot of activity around there with the event centre and other businesses. So what we're trying to achieve there is a number of things, but it's mainly focused on improving connectivity and accessibility for walking and cycling, but also improve safety as well through this area, and linking this part of the network into the work that's already been done on Claudin's Road, Claudin's Bridge, and into the central city. So it starts to link to other work we've done and starts to create a bit of a linkage, an east-west linkage around this part of the city. So that's why we've picked this one. It's well advanced. We've got into the detailed design. The only bit we haven't done yet, and we wanted to talk to you guys before we go to the next step, is to do some localised engagement with the businesses and some of the residents in that area. We're not taking away any traffic lanes. There's no impact on parking. Really is those improvements around safety, walking and cycling. So do you want me to just whip through all the projects and we'll come back for questions at the end? Or how do you want to play this? Questions as we go?
Could I just make a quick comment maybe on that one? I guess I will. You there, Martin?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I guess when you guys don't talk, your mic drops off, and then we're not sure if you're listening. But that's cool. Just get used to the new system. Definitely much better. Hey, look, just a comment while you're doing this engagement. As council owns that Brooklyn Road corner property, they have gone to market. There's currently a shortlist of tenders that are doing a massive redevelopment on that corner. And Nicholas Wells is leading the charge on that, but it may pay just to talk to them and just make sure that that design is aware of what you're doing as well, so that it can be just really well integrated with the development there as well, just as an early stage engagement process.
So I can quickly respond to that. So yes, we have been working with the property team on that corner. We've actually secured a piece of that land to improve our design on that corner. So that's just going through the legal process at the moment to turn that into road.
That's cool, but just so long as all parties are talking to each other. So yeah, if Nicholas Wells is in the property, I just want to make sure that we're not operating in silos.
Are you talking about the same corner? Because Ryan, you're talking about the VTNZ part, aren't you? Is that right?
Yep.
And you're talking about, okay.
Yes, it's the same corner, and point noted, Ryan, that's exactly, definitely will make sure that we're not doing anything in isolation of any of the units within council, particularly the strategic property and Nicholas Wells.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Robb, and then Councillor Bunting.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ryan, for asking that question, because that was one of my questions, given that I know that we've gone out to interested parties on that one, so they may also need to be aware of those changes. Does the Claudin's Road project effectively replace the earlier discussions we had and the very tenuous meetings that we had with local residents about the potential closure of Brooklyn Road from 5 Crossroads? Or is this part of that connectivity that still needs to be worked through?
We've still got to work through what the future of Brooklyn Road is going to hold in 5 Crossroads, but that's a separate discussion. I suspect what will happen eventually is there will be a cycle facility along Brooklyn Road of some sort up to 5 Crossroads, but the future of 5 Crossroads is still certainly up for debate with the community. That's a long way off.
So if we do this work now, are we necessarily preempting, or are we closing off that connectivity that we're trying to create beyond Brooklyn Road?
Not at all. I think this project just starts to enhance that whole area for better walking and cycling connectivity.
Okay. Yeah. Do you anticipate we'll get the same sort of feedback that we got from the residents in and around Brooklyn Road and off Brooklyn Road for this particular work?
No, I think the fact when we were talking around the Brooklyn Road and potential closures up there, that was really the fly in the ointment of that discussion. With this project, there's going to be no closures. We're keeping the same number of traffic lanes. We're just, putting in some additional facilities for walking and cycling to improve safety.
So ret runs won't become an outcome?
Not at all.
Okay. Just getting my head around this, the wording, the additional funding. When I read your notes on our page 25, you say that the committee in December approved additional funding for the planned biking and micro-mobility program, utilising the 1.5 million of budgeted HCC funding from the current financial year. Is it additional funding? No, okay.
Sorry, it's my words, sorry.
So from a selling proposition, we should take the word additional out, because we're not departing from the long-term plan, if you like, in terms of this being additional money that we're seeking for this particular spend program. It's just a decision on how we're going to spend that 1.5 million.
Correct.
Okay,
it was a reallocation of funding rather than additional, and through the committee made that decision.
Okay,
yes.
so I'm quite mindful, this being election year, and from our discussions that we had yesterday, that we need to be very careful how we sell a number of our projects in this current year, and we need to get our wording right. So I'd like to see that word additional taken out if it's not in the true sense additional money.
yes, we will do that because it's not additional money. So that was, yeah.
Okay,
just
okay.
It's my apologies, I got excited.
No, that's okay. I fretted a bit when I saw the word additional there. And I couldn't remember at the December meeting that we were approving anything, so that's okay, as long as we kind of take some care around that selling proposition, because I think there's going to be some quite negative feedback on a lot of our spending this year. Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So Councillor Mark and then Councillor Sarah.
Enjoyed watching the bead of sweat go down the Chair of Finance's side of his head as you were talking about all the extra money we had given us and the vein pulsing on the side of his forehead. No, and relax. Just a couple of quick down on the weeds questions regards the diagrams on page 23 and 24. Most of that's already done, am I right, in the Claudin's East part of that intersection? This is the diagram you've got, the second page in the presentation. Yeah, the one that's up on the board, actually.
Oh, yeah, are we talking about this technical type drawing that's up on the board
Yeah,
now?
that technical one's in my next question. But so, okay, we'll go straight to that if you like. So what you're saying is that light blue areas, because I can't read what they actually are on my...
So some of those areas are like newer curb alignments we're building out. So you know, there's outside the Claudin's Event Centre, there's like this slip lane that goes into Brooklyn Road.
Yep.
That's going to be removed. So there'll be a larger area there for people to gather and wait to cross. Because at the moment it's a really difficult area for large groups to get over. It's unsafe. So we've worked with H3 on their requirements for delivery vehicles and turning at that intersection. And so we've agreed that design with H3.
Right.
So you'll see some other curb build-outs in other blued areas as well.
Okay. Thank you. No, that makes that a lot clearer. And look, my other question is around the way the bridge is being used at the moment. I'm seeing more and more pedestrians walking down that cycle lane to try and get onto the cage that is the footpath on Claudin's Road. And I'm not an engineer, you are, but I just see if we somehow shorten down that rail where people could get on or off, because once you get on one side of the bridge as a pedestrian, you're trapped there and you're kind of directed all these crazy directions at the other end. Is much thought gone into that? Because I see cycling, it's really easy to get through there now, which is great. But pedestrians, it's quite the maze.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping with this project, and also we're doing some wayfinding that will go along with this as well.
Great, yep.
And at the other end of O'Neill Street, we've got a project to build a light control pedestrian crossing across River Road and then linking down into the central city that way. That once those things are in place, we will actively be encouraging pedestrians to use that route rather than walk down Claudin's Road across the bridge that way. It's trying to stop them is really difficult.
Yep.
Because if people did determine to walk down there, they will walk down there.
Oh yeah.
It's really hard to sort of prevent them from doing it, but we will do all we can to encourage them to use the safest possible route.
So you're convinced that the pedestrian crossing over that blind hill at O'Neill Street is safer than somehow working at a pedestrian route across the...
Yeah, the O'Neill location is, there's an existing pedestrian refuge just to the north of the intersection there at River O'Neill. Yeah, that's where we're planning to put a light control pedestrian crossing. Yeah. And it's going through a design and safety audit process at the moment.
Okay, all right. Okay. Yeah, that worries me, that bridge that comes along River Road and over the top, especially in sunstrike times. It's really a worry.
So we'll take on board that and just make sure those concerns in terms of the linkages are thought through in terms of the project. And just, this is one project in terms of Claudin's Road that there, and Martin, please correct me if I'm in on it, there are VR goggles that you can actually see the location.
Might let Honor just talk about that if you want.
So you can actually be part of the design. So that's our next step. So so just a quick...
Yep, so as part of the process, the designers have put together a virtual reality capability with the design. So you can actually put VR goggles on and place yourself in that environment. You can change it to nighttime, daytime, winter, summer.
Whereabouts do we find those?
So that is being arranged with our communications team. So we should be in touch
Yeah.
We'd like you all to have a go at that.
in the coming
Yeah,
weeks. Yeah.
and I think back to you. Thank you on it. I think the wayfinding thing is going to be vital here because for the first time we're actually separating bikes and pedestrians in the city. So that's going to be really, really, because the only goggles they're using at the moment are beer goggles, and I think we're going to need some big fat signage to get pedestrians down O'Neill Street if that's going to be our way. So, yep, that's all I got. Thank you. And I just want to say I really appreciate what you're doing here because it's making the Claudin's Bridge hopefully work. Great. Hey, Rob.
Thank you.
Well, I'm so bored of sending him photos. It's really embarrassing.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Bunting. Councillor Sarah, and then Deputy Mayor Jeff. And then you, Max, and then...
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Would it be possible to jump back to the previous slide? Overall, I think it's fantastic. I guess just from a usability point of view, I did have a couple of things to raise. So one is currently, if you're standing at the corner of O'Neill and Heapy Terrace and you're trying to cross or vice versa to the corner of the event centre, it can take a really long time, to the point that I've stood there and we've all looked at each other and commented, will we ever, leave this corner? So my concern is that if you're asking, firstly, we should be all over the city considering how long we're making pedestrians wait, particularly when they push the button and they've missed the point in the cycle and they have to wait a whole nother cycle. But also if you're asking someone cycling along to go there, wait and then cross, if we want people to actually use the cycling infrastructure we're putting in, I think we have to rethink the signal timings. Otherwise, the risk is that you do start to see people get frustrated at how long it takes, and then they end up trying to turn right with the cars. And I guess the other question I had was, on Brooklyn Road, there's lots of good space to actually put cycle lanes down there with this massive median strip down the middle and things. And I'm wondering if by maintaining the 3 different lanes at the intersection, are we putting money into intersection now and close it in, which is going to have to be refitted if we put bike lanes down Brooklyn Road? Because there's not really a lot of space from what I can see to have all 3 lanes at that intersection and decent cycle lanes with decent width.
So not in terms of that, the detailed design in Brooklyn Road and this intersection have been considered in terms of our resealing program, which is where elected members have asked us when we are resealing, how can we make the amenity better in the locations that we can look at. Are you okay if we take that question offline, Sarah, and give you more technical detail? I'm just mindful we've got 10 minutes left of the presentation.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah,
I saw
but
there was
absolutely. That's a really good point in terms of don't just build improvements to an intersection if the connections aren't there as well. And so we've definitely heard that message from this council in terms of making sure that it is all connected and that we are forward thinking in that space.
Okay, thanks. I guess the last thing I just wanted to raise, because I do use the bridge a lot, and one concern that I've found, I don't know if others do, is when you're coming from Central City across the bridge, there's the left turn slip lane, and it's fine if you're going along the left turn slip lane as a cyclist, but if you keep going straight, I've had a number of incidents where I've been quite worried that a car going straight and then wanting to turn was going to turn right in front of me and not see me or something. And my worry is if we're connecting this to Ruakura, which is just being upgraded now, and we want to say go down Claudin's Road or have people turn somehow along onto Te Araha, I'm just wondering how that connection is going to work, because I'm not sure if we've fully solved the issue of being cut in front of. whether we need to shorten the left turn slip lane. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, is that something that maybe we could discuss in more detail offline? Just trying to picture what movements are you? Yeah, so that might be one. I'm just trying to visualize. Are you saying the going off Claudin's Road? Yeah. Yeah, we'll have a chat about it later.
Yeah. If we take that offline, because then you can actually picture yourself on the bike, and Honor can see you on that bike. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, my goal is just to make sure that what we put in is right the first time. So that would be.
And and having real life examples like that is really good. So thank you for that. So next is Deputy Mayor Jeff, and then Councillor Van Oosten, and then Mayor Paula.
Thanks, Eva-Lisa. Yeah, look, really supportive of this, of getting a better connection to Claudin's Bridge so that what we've done there works better. I'm just thinking in terms of the issue Ryan raised with that development on the corner there, which we've gone out to market with. I'm just thinking it may be more than just the property team and the potential developers being aware of this, because part of the criteria for the successful tender, at least in my mind, was how the development on the corner there would contribute towards a better connection with the central city. And I had a kind of vision really that they would actually proactively try and do something a bit special there and even contribute cost-wise or whatever. And I would hate to see us minimise that expectation by just saying this is what we're doing here, just so you guys know. So, I mean, I may not be right with that, but that was certainly my feeling, that it was an opportunity if we had a developer on that spot to say, okay, how are you guys going to improve the connection? What are you going to try and do?
Thank you. That's a good point that we will take away and actually sit down and have that conversation. So thank you. Councillor Bennett, yes, and then Mayor Paula.
Look, thank you. And look, I'm mindful that we're really pushing up against time here, but the number of questions obviously shows the importance of this intersection for everybody. And you know, I'm thinking of terms of the rail crossing that happens at that point as well, and the additional complexity that offers, and the real safety concerns that are around there. Now, I know that the lights all shut when there is a train coming up, but I wonder what kind of safety options we're offering for pedestrians and cyclists through there as well, and how are we able to you know, be sure of that integrity there. And also then, have we consulted with NZ Rail, and do we have an understanding of what their train movements are at particular times? So, you know, I've ridden it and I've walked that area. So yeah, interested to hear how that's considered.
Yeah, I can.
Peak traffic times just to cause maximum congestion.
Yes. Thanks, Anna.
Yep, no, I can answer that one. So we've met with Kiwi Rail in the very early stages of this project, and we've undertaken all the necessary assessments and reviews by Kiwi Rail, and kind of parallel with this, we have produced detailed level crossing designs, and what isn't shown as well is a third level crossing down the end of Claudin's Road that connects onto Brooklyn Road. So we would be looking to improve that as well, so a cyclist and pedestrian could potentially bypass this entire intersection if need be. So that is a process happening in the background, and when the funding is available, we would look to improve all level crossings with automatic gates.
Yeah, thank you. And when you're doing that, real-time goggles, happy to be involved in that. I know the point that Sarah's raising around that really long left slip into Grey Street from the Claudlands Bridge. So, and as a cyclist going straight ahead, that's a bit tricky. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Paula.
Something else. I think I was listening to Jeff, but I was thinking I'm agreeing with him in terms of there's that amazing development that we're doing. There's also potential for something on Sonning Car Park. And I think there's an opportunity to join the dots with O'Neill Street, because I've talked with Sean Murray from a different lens, from the whole experience and connectivity of the CBD to Claudlands lens. And there was always a boulevard plan for O'Neill Street, which is sitting somewhere dusty, I think. However, I think it's time to kind of dust it off and make sure that this is consistent, because we want that whole experience. If you're going to get people to move down O'Neill Street, you've got to make it look like that's where they should actually be walking. And at the moment, it doesn't. And so making that the pleasant experience to go from town to Claudlands is really important, not just putting small bits of engineering that might work in some way but don't accentuate the whole outcome, so just to support that voice. So I'd like to understand, actually I did ask Sean to send me again, he was going to look it up, but this was before Christmas, the original design for O'Neill Street, because I think it's about time we had another look at that, Jeff, you know, the whole thing. So, and the other thing in terms of I'm interested in, because I asked a question about this before Christmas also, the Garden Place Green Roof Bike Shelter, $300,000. Anyway, however, I just asked about a couple of two strands. There is a free bike rack just opposite Starbucks, as you know, and does 8 bikes or something, and you just download the app. They are looking at improving that and even putting a shelter across it. I know Union Square's got big designs on in their second phase, which they're building now, their car park, and they're to put a really big CBD bike parking opportunity in there. I haven't seen the detail, but I know they're doing that. And other CBD developments have incorporated parking in. So before we spend $300, I just want to know how we have we fully maximised what we've got. You're not surprised by this question, Elise, because we had this conversation. The other thing is, so if you're saying yes, all the parking spaces that are currently there for bikes are optimised and we need more, is Garden Place, what part of Garden Place, and is Garden Place absolutely, have we done the work that makes that so obvious that that's where it should be? Is that where people are ending up with their bikes in Garden Place when they're going to work or whatever they're going to? I don't know. Is it outside the library?
It's outside Valare's. I call it the large cat litter tray that's outside Valare's.
So is it going on that patch with the gravelly stuff that we're supposed to be taking out?
Yes.
Those trees are still there, by the way, and they need to come out.
So as part of this project, it was planned to get rid of the palm trees and the gravelly area and improve it with this facility at that location. And the reason we chose that is because obviously a lot of people talked about getting rid of that stuff that's there. It's quite unpleasant, but also it's well placed for office workers. It's highly visible. It would be covered, and a lot of the feedback we get from cycling people is that there's not many covered facilities available in the central city for them to use, particularly in adverse weather conditions.
I'm aware of that, but you were aware that they're going to cover that one, right?
I wasn't aware of that, so thank you for that.
That's a joined-up conversation to have with Maureen.
Yeah.
Can I just chip in there too, because we have got plans, I'm not sure if you're aware of this thing called Dame Hilda Ross Way, which is like a walking cycling path in front of the library on that side. So I'm just wondering if it's worth thinking about potentially putting it over near that. You know, we were talking about that as opposed to Ward Street. There's a new walking cycling way we're planning to get down that side of Garden Place. So I'm just wondering if it's on the right side.
We're investigating.
Investigating. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Go home, 10 days. See you, goodbye.
Allergies.
Goodbye. Everyone out.
But on that mark, I think on that point that Mark's making, on that mark that you're making, Mark, I'm also interested in how this fits within behaviour of pedestrians and cyclists. So if it's on that side, are we effectively encouraging people to cycle off Alexander Street down to will they come down Western Rail Trail way and then cycle down Garden Place to get, because I would think that wouldn't have the best results if there was going to be one side of Garden Place that was ever for some other mode of transport, then would you factor it in? So those are the things I'd like to think about and understand better. And the green roof, lovely as it is, how much does that add to the cost of that? Because we're in Garden Place, we're not the huge urbanised city that big, like Melbourne. We've got green space. Why are we putting grass on the roof, and how much is that costing, and how much would it be to maintain when we can barely keep the flowers in the flower pots alive? I'm just saying, we've got all those horrible flying saucer planters. I don't mean to be negative.
No, that's really good feedback, because what I'm hearing there is the proposed or draft, just to get the conversation going in terms of a bike rack. So what I'm hearing is a bike rack is a good idea, but it's just getting the location right to make sure it's intuitive to use in the right place for Garden Place and the future of what that the Garden Place area wants to look and feel like, and making sure that, hey, is $300,000 for a bike rack appropriate, and can we do better, or are there funding partners out there that will actually install it for us and look after it?
And on that matter, I'll just raise it again, and everyone knows that I'm unhappy with Alexander Street. I affectionately call it the rumble strip. And that's the bit between Civic Square and Garden Place, where we pick up the tiles and we put them down again. And we've been all out there. We've all had a look. We had some views. There again, there's a scooter and something park over there. That may be a location closer to the road, which actually prevents people wanting to ride through Garden Place. I don't know, but I'd like to understand how it fits with that whole. Because I keep getting fobbed off on the Alexander Street one, but I'm still interested in, as I've told Chris Allen, at your peril, pick up all those cobbles and lay them down flat again, because we just keep doing that and doing that and doing that and never reaching a result for that strip.
Yes, correct. So the Worley Place is a report that is coming back to council to understand what the options are for the strip between there and there, and so it's just. For
so
us
it may be that
timing.
these bits fit into that as well. I don't,
Okay.
I'm
So
not a transport engineer, but I just want to understand that.
No, that's good. So I'm just mindful of time. Thank you very much.
Some of us love the cobbles, by the way, so as long as there's good options for keeping them. What's happening with the council cycle parking area? We've got lovely covered roofs all around the place around here. Down over there and around here, and they're used by about 2 pedestrians a day, and I'm sure we could fit some cycles in there too, which may mean a bit more flexibility about where this one could go, and with a little bit of screen protection from wind, they could be added to the mix. I know we've only been asking for that for about 13 years, I think, from memory. And we could even stick some EV charging points, e-bike charging points there while we're at it, on the side of the council building. And people who come to council could actually park up there rather than having to go underground or walk half a kilometre. Just thought I might throw that in there to help.
Yes, the conversation has been the opportunity around bike parking underneath the walkway or around the council building, and I know Olna has some designs for that. So we have progressed a little bit in the 13 years, but not fully to actually installation. So, but that is definitely
Bunty and I have got an installation plan. It might take us only about 2 months, I think, to finish it.
I've heard about it.
But yes, so it is about how we incorporate those comments but also making sure that it is actually, we're not putting in an ad hoc design that looks out of place in the area. It's got to, and that's where the urban design guidelines and for the central city. So taking on board, we actually want to enhance our central city with what we're putting in. So it is about what does that look like, and we understand how important that is, particularly through Deputy Mayor Jeff's, the Central City and River Plan Advisory Group. They've also talked to us about that. But yes, take your point, it's taken a long time and we're getting there now. Sorry, I know that we're about to, I'm eating into your lunchtime and I know that Councillor Wilson.
My point was a very quick suggestion. We sell advertising on our bus stop. Why aren't we considering the same with the bike parks, where I think we get quite significant contributions towards the cost?
And so in terms of the EV charging stations and opportunities, that is definitely something we're looking at in terms of how we maximise a revenue or utilising those locations, and how we put the infrastructure in, because the EV charging stations is bringing a lot of infrastructure-led businesses out into the open, because they do want, that is part of their business model. So we are having conversations with businesses
but
around
not only
that same.
that, I'm thinking here of the sides of this bike park and Garden Place would be a premium spot for selling electronic advertising.
Correct.
Thank you. That was all I had to say.
Did you want to do the PT stuff quickly? We've got some PT projects. Just wanted to quickly run through, but we've run out of time, I think, haven't we? We have run out of time.
Can I take 30 seconds to just make one comment on the bike park? Thank you. It was just, I would be really keen to have an option B in terms of spending 300,000. I love the idea, but I won't go into the reasons why I have some hesitations. I'd just love for us to have a couple of options where we, if there are some priorities by park connections or something that can be delivered, within this time frame, to have those, because there's a lot of questions being raised, and I'm not sure whether it's a good idea to put this in without having some idea of what Garden Place should look like in the next few years. Or yeah.
We never know what Garden
It's, definitely we'll have an option B.
From this is more than from something else. Yeah.
Just took a call from a businessman down by Te Rapa. He's got the local subway down there by the thing, and they've coned off half of it, and traffic's backing up big time. So he went down to see them, and they said, "Oh, we're putting more mulch on the roundabout." And he said, "Well, why are you kind of standing here doing nothing?" And they said, "We forgot the mulch." So they're they have to reorder some mulch. So we've got some big standstills going down at that roundabout at the moment. Yeah, you might get a call.
Your face is a picture.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's just our people do a great job.
They do
sometimes,
a fantastic job.
and we're human. So
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes they get let down.
Yep. Oh, it wouldn't be. Yeah, I'll see you on Zoom, folks.
The briefing will resume in a public excluded session at 1:30. Thank you, everyone.
Just noting there were some public transport improvements in the mix with that. So if you do have any questions, we will come back to that, because we didn't have an opportune time to talk.